NEP 2020 has put the topic of vocational and technical integration at the center of mainstream education. The policy has introduced some much needed reform towards our goal of making education in India a truly sought after approach. Vocation and skill learning will now become an integral part of our school curriculums with implementation right from early childhood. Technology integration will now play a key role in reaching students from the remotest of Indian geographies. While these reforms are progressive in nature, it now remains to see how they will be implemented in our existing education system. With that as a background for the discussion today, we bring to you thought leaders across sectors and industries with expertise in education, technology, vocation, policy management, and implementation knowledge to discuss the way forward. Our agenda for the day will be kicked off by a special introductory keynote, followed by our main panel, which will then be followed by a closing keynote and some time reserved for questions. We will kick off this session by hearing from a truly inspirational voice from the education sector who will play a key role in making sure that the NEP is implemented across millions of schools in India. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Biswajit Saha. Dr. Saha is the Director for Skill Training and Education for the Central Board of Secondary Education, popularly known as CBSE. He has held several leadership positions in roles of both vocational and technical education. Dr. Saha, it's an honor to have you with us today. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, namaskar, all the eminent panelists. It's my pleasure to be here with you and also to talk about something which is, of course, is close to my heart, that is New Education Policy 2020. As we know, that education is a manifestation of perfections, what it is already there within the man. And that is none other than Swami Vivekananda had said long back. And now, one way we require the culture, other way the knowledge. The mass of knowledge may not withstand always, but of course, the culture can withstand. So this new education policy altogether tried to discuss about the vision of India, and it is rightly narrated. Of course, the document is very small, the vision document, only 64 to 65 pages, but the power of the document is such that it started from early childhood education, which primarily unregulated affairs till date in the country. And if we look into the completions, that 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, that completes 15 years of educations. And many a times, if we look whenever our children goes to abroad, and these 11-year and 12 years of this schooling is sometimes is not going to fulfill the mandatory requirement of foreign university. So I think the immediate impact would be that there would be no longer any sort of bridge course required for Indian students who complete this kind of systems hereafter. Now, the policy talks about the foundation, literacy, and numeracy skill. There is a lot of confusions, especially being focused with respect to the government schools and the private schools. That variations is very much visible in the country. So, but with respect to these introductions of FLN as a mission, I think the learning level, or rather I should mention the learning gaps between the students of the government schools and the private schools is going to be minimized very soon. The number 3 is with respect to the competency-based educations and connecting the educations with respect to real life. Who does not want to enjoy both in their school life and college life? Because it may be direct criticisms with respect to both CBSE and university education systems, but it is a fact, and all the panelists as a parents also can look into the curriculum boundary. the innovation with respect to the pedagogy is somewhere, I believe, it is missing in the system. No matter, some of the good schools or some of the good university might be bridging that gap, but officially there is a lot of gap, and due to which we are forced to look into the examination pattern, number one, and with respect to this examinations pattern, the curriculum boundary is defined with respect to the textbook, and the load of textbooks and extra activities by different publishers is also very much mandatory requirement to cover the mass of knowledge in the ecosystems. Now, how far it is feasible? Now, of course, CSR Box and other eminent panelists are very much attached with the technical backgrounds. The policy talks about the computational thinking, coding to be introduced at the early age. Now, tell me, where is the time? Now, one way we are focused that somewhere this curriculum load, and especially from class 9 to 12, it is an enormous load. And moreover, 10 plus 2 pass outs are puzzled with the competitive examinations. So the thinking ability and joy, whatever we are discussing, parents are not getting time, and children to dur ki baat hai. So that's why the policy is trying to make the exam reform. It's talk about how we can simply shift from that rote-based assessment to competency-based assessment. And that competency-based assessment in turn will bring the competency-based learning so that the student can aim for some certain skill set in life. And that itself will bring some sort of innovations, or rather room for project-based learning. And student can think of, rather they will get enough time to think. Nowadays, even after class 8, believe me, most of the parents, including me, sometimes we thought that sports, health, extracurricular activities, this should be seen differently. So some sort of biasness is there in every individual's mindset. Now, how to remove these mindsets? So over a period of time, the policy talks about that, okay, there won't be any hard separations between the curricular, co-curricular, even within the vocational education. Now, you look into the tag-based educations or so-called professional educations or career educations, including that vocational skill. If you really aim for the country the way the Honorable Prime Minister is projecting that self-reliant India, in the manufacturing space, due to the pandemic, there could be definite advantage. The many organizations are definitely looking that there should be some service and your manufacturing enhancement in India, especially due to the certain relationship breakup with the neighboring nation. So that will bring, or rather that will create, there is a huge requirement of potential manpower who are skilled and technically enabled, or rather sound, to face this kind of challenges. So here I think it's a high time the policy need to be translated properly so that both school education and higher education systems can sit together and bring a synergy and within that framework of that policy, so that whatever we are discussing about the credit bank or whatever we are talking about that multidisciplinary approach in educations, it won't be meaningful unless until the flexibility of that subject combinations with respect to individual requirement, if that are being offered by the school and that advantage is also being followed by the university systems, I think that day would be a day for freedom for the children. Because nowadays, whatever we are discussing, some way, the present systems of education we are restricting. Maybe in CBSE's ecosystems we are offering, or we are giving a tremendous flexibility to the student that they can opt for physics with music. But whether that particular child, while applying for Delhi University admission, will be given that equal advantage for physics honors? There is a big question. So this policy is actually envisaging to remove this kind of obstacle, but implication is there now that university, their admission process need to be reformulated with respect to this new policy requirement. Then only the student, parents, and the teachers can have an absolute freedom in terms of offering the subjects and teaching the subject. But that itself will bring certain new things, or it could be, one can think in terms of complications also, because for teaching one subject, there would be a requirement of multiple teachers. So India need many teachers, or existing teacher need to be trained. So there is a specific line on teachers' professional development, and that national standard for teachers will be developed. So that will some way correct, or that mindset that teacher, instead of only focusing the boundary of the textbook or the last 5 years question paper, they will come out to change their pedagogy, and especially that experiential based pedagogy, and for teaching that competency based education. So that is fundamentally required. If you look into the various countries, whether it is Germany, Australia, Sweden, and including Asian country, Korea, that the importance of skill is being stressed upon at early days. So they are the coding from class 3 or class 6, they are offering. So similarly, including China, they are also offering all these digital educations at early age. So that competency need to be, because nowadays that slowly that pen paper test too, there is a requirement of focusing on test based on computer. So that computer-based test, if maybe at class 3 or class 5 or class 8 or maybe after class 10, or even nowadays university is struggling to conduct online examination. So there is a huge potential requirement of infrastructure, number one, and the digital literacy. Digital literacy, both for the teachers, parents, and students, the early we can stress upon, that would rather create a mechanisms for bright future. So these are certain aspects, and of course at the higher education's level, definitely there are several universities are there in India. If you look into the data, approximately 993 universities, and catering the requirement of around 3.74 million students. Now, question is whether that universities, that quality of that universities, curriculum transactions, and that research mechanisms, so all those process-centric aspects need to be introspect, so that quality outcomes will be visible over the years. And here the policy talks about national research foundations. Now, I was just looking into the data with respect to the PhD, number of PhD produced by the country annually. And it is not more than 500, 600. So one way, that means that quality research, even if you look into this IIT data, hardly 3 to 5% students retain right after their BTech programs. So they are not even preferring the master programs in their own premier institute. So they go abroad, or maybe many of them are joining industry right after BTech program. So that potential gap is very much visible. So with respect to the engineering and tech, both NIT, IIT, and all engineering institute and leading university must come forward to have a infrastructure and give a positive synergy for creating rather research infrastructure in the institute. Then only over a period of time, I think that real translations of the policy will be a real happening in the academic institutes, and more students would like to retain in India. The last point which I like to stress upon with respect to this policy is language, which is very, very important. Believe me, there is a maybe certain level of confusions with respect to this language policy. But more than 90% of the students are going to retain in India. Only a negligible percentage of students are usually go to abroad, either for the higher studies or even for the employment purpose. So that means that in the basic requirement of learning multiple Indian language is very much essential. If somebody from Delhi want to stay in Bangalore, if he or she knows Kannada, I think the life is very easy there. But English as an operating language is also very much essential, which policy is nowhere undermined. So that multiple language learning at early stage, the three language formula is very much practically applicable up to class A, which anyway multiple states are adhering. So that way, I think policy has given a positive visions for learning Indian language, and of course, foreign languages are also very much got right placed in the policy document. The last one is with respect to the gap with education 4.0 and industry 4.0. Here, of course, I would like to personally put this agenda that computational thinking right at the schools to college, whether we are offering artificial intelligence or design thinking, or more similar kind of coding and robotics and all these new tech areas, over a period of time, we need to stress upon, and the teachers' training to understand this new technology and to promote in the school culture need to be stressed upon. Otherwise, this would be a simple document which some school will offer, some school will again stressed onto the academic curriculum. So besides, that's why that intermixing is very much essential. So with that, for teachers training, for offering quality educations right from age 3 is highly focused on national policy on education. And here it is high time both industry and institute, both school, college, university, and industry need to work together, because it may happen that school may not have a good physics lab, but neighboring engineering college or polytechnic may have very good physics lab. University, most of the universities are not mainly offering master's program on humanities and social science. And that if we look into the statistics, the second comes the management, and the others are that way a missing link. We need to rather create a positive ecosystems where the gross enrollment ratio can be enhanced from present 26.4 to as much as possible. And with respect to the school, of course, up to class 10th, the enrollment ratio is quite encouraging. But post, rather from class 9 and 11, that gross enrollment ratios is again need to be stressed. And here comes that wholesale participations of industry and higher education institutions together to implement the possible outcomes of National Education Policy 2020, which has been truly endorsed by the government. And the implementations plan and the new learning, especially the focus on digital learning, and teacher need to decide which part to be taught with respect to, with the help of books, with the help of online module, and which part can be discussed with the help of project. And there, I think new technology and all the digital activities can be promoted in the systems. With this, I think the very progressive documents, it would be meaningful if state, center, and all stakeholders together try to translate it into an action plan and implement for positive outcomes. Thank you, CSR Box, for inviting me. I think the other eminent panelist is going to highlight what way more outcome-based approach would be there from that policy. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Saha, for giving such a wonderful overview of the policy and especially highlighting the fact that it is really the synergy between players in the education sector, the government, corporate industry, and our skill development ecosystem that is really going to bring this policy to life. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Now that we've heard from such an eminent voice about what the NEP implementation will look like, it's now time to get into the more nitty-gritties of the policy and discuss some important consideration when it comes to the integration of vocation and technology. Thus, we shall now engage in a panel discussion to understand the NEP framework more comprehensively. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our panelists for this evening. To begin with, our moderator for this evening is Ms. Joyita Das, Lead Education and Skilling Initiatives for India IBM CSR. Ms. Das is a corporate citizenship professional with a unique experience of working with government and non-governmental organizations, multilateral funding agencies, and corporates on improving the quality of education. At her current role at IBM, she leads education and skilling initiatives driven by high-quality digital citizenship. Ms. Das, pleasure to have you moderating for us today. Our first panelist for this evening is Ms. Nooria Ansari, President of the Learning Links Foundation. The Learning Links Foundation is an NGO that innovates products, solutions, and services for the education and development sector. Ms. Ansari has over 19 years of experience in leading large-scale programs, managing diverse government and corporate stakeholders, and driving organizational growth. Ms. Ansari, absolute delight to have you amongst us today. Up next, we have Mr. Gurumurthy Kashinathan, founder and director for IT for Change, an NGO based out of Bangalore, focusing on using digital technologies to contribute to human rights, social justice, and equity. Mr. Guru has 31 plus years of experience in the development and corporate sectors. He leads projects in the area of education, including in research, demonstration projects, systematic teacher education reform, and policy advocacy. Mr. Guru, an honor to have you join us today. Our third panelist for this evening is Mr. Ram Sharma, Director of Academic Strategy at Global University Systems. Mr. Sharma has been driving academic transformation and innovation using technology to solve issues of access, quality, and equity across higher education. He has held leadership roles across organizations such as Plaksha University, Shiv Nadar University, Amity, and KPMG. He was a Fulbright Scholar at University of California, Berkeley, and a Chevening Gurukul Fellow at the University of Oxford. Dr. Sharma, an absolute delight to have you join us. Our final panelist for this evening is Mr. Piyush Prakash, Senior Associate and Research Officer at the HRD Vertical at NITI Aayog. At the HRD Vertical, he is responsible for policy research, analysis, and formulation with respect to education. His interest lies in governance of education, edtech, and alternative learning spaces. Pleasure to have you join us, Mr. Prakash. We now look forward to hearing from all of you, and I will now hand over this discussion for Ms. Das to moderate.
Thank you so much, Yamini. And I think after that very simple overview from Dr. Saha, I think very little needs to be said for us here together and amongst all the participants. What is important is, we choose a key area, a couple of points like the competency framework, the assessment, the teachers, training. Some of these are very key for success as we start implementing this. So, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in talking, but I think let's engage with the panelists, and I'm going to go to Nooria first and ask her a few maybe tough questions. So, Nooria, you've been in this field for over 18, 19 years, and what's your experience, especially if you can touch upon two things. A lot has been said about higher education and the connect. So if we have to make that integration and, from early childhood, what is it that we really have as a solid example from a community now? And what is it that we need to sort of get a little better at if we have to really do it well in the next 2 to 3 years? So you can be candid, you can give us examples, and let's discuss this together and see where we land at the end of this hour. So Nooria, what is it that you have to share with us today?
Thanks for unmuting me, Yamini. Thanks, Joyita, for that. I think looking at looking at the education system and the way things have changed over the last 20 years, you're right, Joyita. I think when we reflect, there are things that we can learn from. There are good experiences and good best practices that already exist, and there are aspects of the policy that lend themselves really to piggybacking on these best practices. So I'm just going to jump into it and I say, if you look at the NEP today, it's for us an offering that we can take advantage of. We in the education sector have asked for freedom. We've asked for multidisciplinary. We've asked for easier entry exit. We've asked for multidisciplinary approaches. We've asked for children trying to look at options and variety based on their interest, and we really got that in terms of the flexibility in the curriculum, the approach in the methodology, the blended learning, the fact that they're focusing on citizenship. I think from that perspective, the policies provided that spine, so to speak, and that framework for us to actually, as educationists, now build upon. And to your point, how do we build upon it? And I think you're right when you said that number one, teacher training and teacher capacity building is something that maybe needs to be looked at. We already have a good example from the CBSE when they launched the formative assessment CC, and the way they went about to really prepare teachers from a capacity building perspective, and that really showed that fundamental reform can be brought about in a short period of time with the right intent and capacity building levers in place. So we have that as a very good example. This time round, the NEP is also placing a huge emphasis around digital and looking at coding from a very early age, moving on to AI at a secondary school system, and that requires a fair amount of readiness. It's not only that the fact that the curriculum is there and the opportunity to provide it is there, but I think a lot of teacher upskilling will be required to be able to leverage it. A lot of good math teachers will have to really focus on things like statistics and probability, to make sure that that we are able to take advantage, or our students are able to take advantage of an AI curriculum, or are able to take advantage of coding at such an early age. So I think there is intent. We have some good practices that we've seen. We also have access now to a wider network. A lot of conversations have happened around the fact that there is very limited access to good technology or good infrastructure at the school level. So how can we look at courses on AI or big data analytics or machine learning? But the response to that is that today school complexes become a microcosm. The ease with which we can relate to higher education becomes a microcosm. Access to CSCs becomes something that we can leverage upon. So I think the third pillar, so to speak, on which I think we have to depend on as far as the policy is concerned, is the ability to collaborate. It's really the 21st century skill that has come back to us. It's about collaboration between departments, collaboration between governments, collaboration between partners, and using the entire ecosystem actually to thrust movement and direction to help provide our children with the opportunity. So we have a policy that supports a very child-centered learning. We have systems in place that can actually augment that reality. We have best practices. Now it's really up to us to be able to actually take advantage of it. And do we now wait? The big question for me is, do we now wait for saying, oh, when Dr. Saha moves, then we will respond? Or do we then step up and say, this is what we can do in our way, in our ecosystem, to offer that hand of collaboration, offer that hand of continuity and community, and offer really those opportunities to our students. So that's where I was coming from, Joyita. And I think the fact that today we look at coding and saying, there is a structure behind it in grade 3. There is a component of, simple things like Scratch, moving on to C, moving on to Python, moving on to other aspects. I think the model exists. Now, the model exists in an online environment. The model exists in an offline environment. Will we do what, let's say, for example, IT at school did way back when they set up CSCs and set up, CSCs everywhere, which some failed or some succeeded? Or will we be looking at, the way JNVs or the KV system have actually, done some very interesting work in providing infrastructure, providing capacity building, getting teachers on board, and then moving change. So we have these best practices that we can learn from. And I think that's what we need to leverage on.
I think that's quite a few of the points and examples from there, and that's exactly what we need to kind of make ourselves aware. And I think you touched upon it, saying that take that proactive step, right? Not just wait for the other partner, whether it's a government partner or another industry partner or another NGO partner or the school teachers. So each constituent does a massive responsibility. Otherwise, it's very hard for a nation like ours to really progress with that kind of vision document. So of course, change of name, also is very critical. I think we missed out that right at the beginning. So, moving from an HRD to, a Ministry of Education, it's come back to us, and it's clear to us that this is the particular role of a ministry. This is the particular role of, several other partners. Let me now go to, go across to Guru. Guru has been really a guru of open technology. And Nuria, you have really touched upon pedagogy. Dr. Shah said this particular intermixing of pedagogy, technology, making it simple, making it flexible is important. Guru, I know you've played around a lot and had fun with a lot of open resources and, platforms that you have experienced. Little babies, growing up to fine people, in terms of their names. I'll leave it to you, but I just want to ask you two things. One is, what do you still consider as a barrier, apart from the usual suspects that we all know, right? What is the current biggest 2-3 barriers, right? And what are the examples that we can leave our participants here or audience here with that is forward-looking rather than being cynical? So, Guru. Are you on mute, Guru?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Joyita, CSR Box for having me in this panel, and I'm looking forward to listening to the other panelists and other participants' views on how we can really help technology become more mainstream in our education system in the country. I've been working in this space for the last 15-16 years now, and I think to start with a positive note, we have made a lot of progress. And I remember a decade ago and 15 years ago, technology was seen as something completely alien, foreign to the school system, and teachers and educators used to frown on it and look at it as something which is wrong, something which is evil. And I think if you look at the situation today, there is a sea change, and I think we must recognize that. Today, in today's special environment where we are suffering from the pandemic, teachers are jumping onto online learning, and this is happening across the board. This is happening in a mainstream manner, and I think teachers' willingness to embrace technology has significantly altered in the last few months. So I think I want to start on a positive note. While we have to address the challenges, we have made enormous progress over the last decade, and certainly the pandemic has given us even more reason to push for technology in education. Nevertheless, challenges remain, and I think I was looking at some of the chats that popped on my phone, and people are talking about the fact that access is still a very major issue. So even in Bangalore, where I come from, I would say 10% of the students are able to connect very comfortably to online learning. 90% are not able to connect at all or connect with great difficulty. And obviously that statistic is, completely unacceptable if you really want India to be a superpower in this area. So I think the NEP does talk about that. So it talks about public digital infrastructure. No, digital infrastructure requires investment. It's not going to just come up like that. Of course, mobile phones have taken over the country, and we know that there are more mobile phones in India than toilets. That's a very interesting statistic for all of us, that people value mobile phones so much that they rather have a mobile phone than even have a toilet. But mobile phones can only go so far, and they cannot reach the whole hog. So we need to have computers, we need to have servers, we need to have digital infrastructure, connectivity available all over the country, and that really puts a huge focus on governmental investment. So CSCs were mentioned, Nuria mentioned CSC. CSC was a method to ensure digital penetration to the panchayats, to the last mile across the country. It has had partial successes, partial failures. But I think there is a lesson there. The ITH schools, of course, also try to do the same thing. I think if you were to look at successes, I would really put Kerala as a very significant success in the country today. So whether it's a CSC scheme, they probably have the best implementation of CSC in the country, or you look at ITH schools program, again, they are probably number one in the country. So we need to ask ourselves, what are the things that Kerala is doing well? And to the extent it is possible to contextualize it, to the extent it is possible to replicate it, upscale it across the country, we must. Of course, state by state conditions will differ, so we can't exactly replicate it. But some of the work that IT for Change has been doing has been really to look at Kerala learning and to see if Karnataka can go that way. Yes, Karnataka has significantly implemented many of the ideas that Kerala came up with. So the first thing really is, again, I'm looking at the chat and people are saying teachers don't want technology, teachers do not want to embrace technology. And I come from the corporate sector, and if you look at the corporate sector, there is no question that the customer is wrong. There is no question that the customer doesn't want your product and there is a problem with the customer. If the customer doesn't want your product, the problem is not the customer, the problem is the product, the problem is the solution that you're offering. This really means that our ability to understand the customer, and I'm using the teacher as a kind of a customer, the teacher is more than a customer, the teacher is a partner in our efforts. But if you want the teacher to embrace technology, and so long as we are doing technology to the teacher, and this is a preposition that I would like to use, so long as we are using technology, we think technology has to be done to the teacher, we won't make progress. But when we think technology has to be done with the teacher, and this is not a cliche, this is something that we have seen in our work, when teachers are a part of the process of trying to understand what is the problem we are trying to solve, what is the objective we are trying to meet, then the technology integration acquires much less negativity or constraint than otherwise it may be. Otherwise may be the case. So, for example, Nuria was talking about the fact that today, when you talk about AI, you need to go back to mathematics. If your mathematics foundations are weak, you are not going to build AI skills on scale. Of course, India is such a large country with thousands, millions of students and teachers. So even if you take a small percentage, you'll have large number. But that is not what Niti Aayog, for example, when they say AI for all and AI for good of all is what Niti Aayog keeps saying. If you want AI for all, it really means that mathematics has to become something that is much more accepted, celebrated by students and teachers all over the country, which means pedagogy of maths has to be investigated. Technology can play a role in that also, which is what has been a focus of our own work. So the first principle for making this technology revolution much more acceptable is to understand the teacher, to understand the teacher's needs and context, and to see how we can create solutions with the teacher, not create it and then go to the system and say, hey, teachers have to implement it. I think that mindset shift is extremely important. The second thing, the NEP talks about public infrastructure, and I hope the governments will put their money into actually making sure that infrastructure is available not only in the school, but also in the communities, because you need technology in the communities. Only then online education can happen. It has to be at the homes of students. It has to be in community spaces, which can be CSCs, which can be panchayats. It can be any number of places that infrastructure should be made available. The second thing is, again, language is a very significant challenge, very unique to India. And I think this is an extra challenge that we face because multilinguality is the way of life, and English is still spoken by maybe 10-15% of the population of the country, and a large percentage of the population is not comfortable with English, which again means that if you're talking AI, then we can't talk AI only in English. You have to talk AI in Santali, you have to talk AI in Bengali, you have to talk AI in Kannada. And that's the way AI will, the idea of AI, the learning of AI will grow. We don't need to think that science can only be taught or learned in English. The NEP again makes very important pronouncements in this area also. It talks repeatedly in multiple places of how technology itself can be used to create resources in Indian languages. And I think if AI has to become AI for all, then the first step is infrastructure. The second thing is materials in Indian languages. And that is again something that IT for Change has been focusing on. Joyita mentioned open resources, and we have been trying to encourage teachers to create resources in local languages. Teachers are the best bet to create because you need resources on scale, and that can only be done by hundreds of thousands of teachers across the country. So the first is infrastructure, which includes devices and connectivity. The second is content. And as a part of both these, understanding the teacher's context and needs become extremely critical. If these three things fall in place, I don't see any reason why we will not be achieving the goals that we have set out for ourselves, which is every student, every teacher is digitally literate. Every student, every teacher is able to use all technologies, including the latest and the old technologies, for the benefit of society, for the benefit of learning of the individuals, as well as for the development and progress of the nation. I think I will stop here. I'll come back again. Thank you, Joyita.
Thanks, Guru. And I think, you touched upon the foundational as well as the future skills, very, very critical. Government investment and focus, of course, I'm sure that's something that we all have to wait and see. There's tons to do in terms of professional development and training, which Dr. Shah was mentioning. Of course, teachers are learning, but you touched upon a very, very important point that each one has to feel that they are contributing to something. And that's the only way that the child can take a responsibility and ownership of learning as well, not just a recipient. And a teacher can then become much more of a, empowered facilitator than just a role of, just disseminating knowledge. Let me just go across Piyush, So, Piyush, you've been with Niti Aayog and you've particularly seen this policy, shape up. We talked about, you heard Dr. Shah, you heard us, all, Nuria and Guru talk about, what are the barriers, what are the important examples. Now, if I have to go from here and on behalf of everybody, ask you that, what is the larger thinking or strategic thinking, if there is, for Niti Aayog? What are the top 3 things that you would say, we should kind of focus on or chase, right? And then I'd also request you to probably bring out some large government initiatives as an example for us to say that, do we really need to not do that? Because we as a nation really do very badly by not, by pausing things or by stopping things. We just continue to do things and it keeps growing organically sometimes. And then, some really scales up and does wonderful and some just don't see the light of the day. So Piyush,
sure.
And if you can touch upon these large initiatives, and what do you see as the top 3 things that we together, set of stakeholders, can energize our ecosystem?
Right, sure. Am I audible too? Yeah, okay. First of all, thanks to CSR Box and Joyita, and also thanks to all the panelists for being here. And I also thank to all the participants who are here and listening to us. Like all of us already, discussed a lot of points regarding various initiatives, the policies, the reforms of policies are is talking about. I'll start with the word collaboration. Like that was the thing which actually, struck me. And this is what Niti Aayog, for that matter, Ministry of Education, is trying to do. The first thing what we have started now, especially with respect to the integration of technology, that the government started working on the National Education Technology Forum, which the NEP also talks about, right? The creation of a forum. So the discussions are underway. There is a task force which is working on that, and we have certain experts with us in that group. And the idea is to, look around across the world and think about various aspects which will make a really impactful, integration of technology to improve the learning outcomes in the country. So that remains the key focus. Apart from that, we also have some initiatives which we have done in the past, as you were asking about some examples or use cases, I would say. To use technology in terms of administration, facilitating the teachers in delivering their job, also facilitating the administrators to be able to see where there is a need for course correction or there is need or external support that they need. So with respect to that, if you see the Sathi program, which Niti Aayog started in 2017 in 3 states of Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, we did a lot of initiatives. For example, we started a program called DigiSat in the view of the COVID pandemic that and the strategy or the way we went forward was to think about the content that needs to be created, the medium through which we are doing lectures or the lessons, and finally what are the enablers that's needed, right? So somebody already mentioned, I think Guru mentioned that depending on different states, you will have to strategize in a different way. So content is definitely available in different languages, because most of the quality content is available in Hindi and few regional languages. So the word collaboration that comes into picture. For example, the Diksha platform during the lockdown got somewhere around 200 crore hits, and people like 60 lakh people actually completed courses on Diksha. So, and the content that you see on Diksha is more of a result of a collaboration between different states, government and Ministry of Education, where teachers were producing a lot of good content, which was being consumed during this process. So even in future, I see there is a need for further collaboration from different not-for-profit organizations who are working in content part, organizations working in pushing for IT platforms or some initiatives for example, personalized adaptive learning, how we can use the latest technology. There are a few examples of using of ICT. So we have another program called Aspirational Districts program at Niti Aayog, where we are trying out different EdTech initiatives and to have a proof of concept, whether they are scalable or not, whether they are sustainable or not. So all of that is in process now, and all this research and evidences that we are gathering from our own context and as well as from different RCTs have been done across the world, which shows like how certain type of ICT intervention or PAL interventions, they have proved to be improving the learning outcomes. So the idea is about gathering evidence. I'll say it's more like evidence-based decision making, and which is also the vision of NAP 2020, when it especially with respect to the National Education Technology Forum. So these are the few broad initiatives with respect to technology that we are looking at. And definitely we're building upon the past experiences and the proof of concepts that have been created. And we kind of, will invite all the stakeholders to come and collaborate and co-create this thing. With the education as a body is a public good. And unless everybody is not coming on board, we not see anything going forward, right? So, for example, people who are working on providing the hardware or coming up with some innovative solution, the sharing mechanism. There is another study which was done in the Baka district of Gaya, which is a special district. And we did a program called Unnayan Baka, which actually improved the learning level of the students. And an independent evaluation shows that it's quite effective to have this shared and low cost intervention given our financial constraint of the state. And then this particular intervention was scaled up to the entire state. Now it's known as Unnayan Bihar. So these are the few examples which I'm talking about. We'll have to look at different contexts, different sort of examples, different proof of concepts, which have enough evidence, some research done on that, some evaluation impact studies done, which should be guiding our next steps forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Piyush. I think, evidence-based, of course, research and decision-making is important. And right now, I think co-opting, collaborating that you said, not just at policy level, but with the state partners, with all the state stakeholders is extremely crucial for us to succeed. We have a big responsibility as well as from NCERT in sort of creating all the roadmap that we have the commitment for the next 2 to 3 years. I'm just thinking that while education is no longer going to be a luxury, it is absolutely going to be very critical for us to succeed as a nation. Let me go to the other side. We started from early education, and we touched upon few guiding pillars in the secondary and higher secondary, and some of these decision makings and research orientation. Let me go towards the end of the spectrum, which is more towards the higher education, and ending with either this whole population landing into a workforce, or creating a culture of innovation, because how many jobs can we really create, right? There's so much of pressure. How can we really build that talent pipeline? So Ram, when I see, and Dr. Shah touched upon this, for example, having introduced an AI at a school level, if we honestly don't have a degree level, and I think we saw this 2 weeks or 3 weeks back, that some of the universities and leading universities have come up with undergraduate and postgraduate courses, at least attempting a framework, which is wonderful. We just have to see how that integration happens. So Ram, where do you see when you are sitting there with your constituents at the higher education system, where do you see what's the way forward with this policy, and what are the challenges and roles of not only just higher education but industry, right? All the more. Can you just touch upon a few key points there, Ram? And I think we also have to, Yamini, just let us know how much time do we have, so that we also have, time for some questions before Dr. Mishra joins us.
Yeah, thanks, Joyita. So first of all, I'm particularly pleased with the policy's vision on the higher education, and it really touches upon all the fundamental issues that the higher education in the country was facing, and therefore it has all the right ingredients in the policy right out there. So even the critiques of the policy can only critique the policy for the execution part, that whether the execution will be in the spirit of what has been written in the policy, and which of course all of us do agree that execution can relay even best of the policies. But we all should congratulate ourselves for creating a good policy framework for the country, and that's right there. Coming back to the linkages of the policy with or linkages that the policy is envisaging for school education and the higher education is, so one of the key issues that we used to listen a lot in the higher education side was that the students were not well prepared for the university education, or the kind of university education or the rigor that a good university education would require the students to undergo. They were not well prepared, and therefore the focus on, I would say, AI or no AI. I mean, all these are tools, but I think even more fundamental thing is the way of thinking, the way of seeing the world around themselves, and the way of approaching a problem that they see around them and solve that problem. Now, if somebody really wants to solve that problem and solve that through a kind of inquiry-led learning, and then, I mean, whatever tools are required, the learner can learn. I mean, once the fundamentals are there, and I agree with Guru that, maths, for example, and I would add maybe one more thing as a strong linguistic attitude. So maybe learning more than one languages, of course. So let's say a strong language and strong maths would, and maybe, I mean, as the Greek old school used to say, rhetoric, language, and math. So essentially, critical thinking, it boils down to the way of thinking and the way of solving problems. So once that is there, then of course we can have a skilled workforce, which is kind of looking at solving the problems, and then of course jobs creation, for example, employment, all those things could come out of this process of solving problems which we see around us. Now, coming to the issue of particularly of innovation that you were mentioning about. So one of the key issues in India, for example, I personally feel, and which the policy has not touched upon directly, is that in our country, we have kind of segregated the research institutions from the teaching institutions. I mean, there are large number of CSIR labs. There are large number of research institutions which are standalone research institutions funded directly by the central government or the respective state governments. But those institutions hardly have any interaction with the universities. Whereas if we see globally, all such research institutions are integrated well with the university systems, whereas there is an active flow of academics and researchers from universities to research institutions and vice versa. So this watertight compartmentalization of research and teaching is kind of not going to be productive for the country. And I think I see Dr. Sanjay Mishra is here from DST, and I think I hope sincerely that this kind of this silo is broken between the research and teaching universities, and which really would be a progressive move, like the way the policy is progressive. I think this streamlining of these institutions and making them talk to each other would really go a long mile. The second piece is on the investment side. The policy does talk about raising an investment of, let's say, current about 4% to 6%, which is quite welcome. But I think the challenge is that given the resources we have and the nature of our country and the diversity and the various social economic issues that we face, including, or rather not just including these social economic challenges, but also the kind of geographic situation we are in. We have neighbors that we have, and the kind of defense expenses we are required to make as a country. We may not, no government would probably have bandwidth, at least in the near future, to do the kind of investments that probably would be required to result into a research infrastructure that we want. And therefore, some possibility of getting industry funding or CSR funding into the research. And I was looking at one of the Nature articles on research funding in various countries, and I was amazed. The US spends, for example, about $475 billion, of which about 80% is spent by industry. So I mean, about 475, roughly $100 billion are spent by the government, and $375 billion is spent by industry. Similarly, China spends about 375. The percentage of industry spend is more or less the same, about 75 to 80%. Similarly, Japan spends about 220 billion. Again, the industry spends about 70%. Germany spends about 110. Again, the percentage remains more or less the same. In Indian context, the total research spending in India is about $50 billion. And so first is that there is an absolute gap in the spending. And out of this 50 billion, also roughly about 30% is spent by the industry. So if we look at the absolute number gap between, let's say, China and India, so China's industry spends about $300 billion a year on research, whereas the Indian industry spends only about $15 billion. So there is a huge gap between the kind of investments the countries are making into research and innovation, and the kind of economic growth that investment is driving towards. So as a country, if we want to become an innovation hub, I think it would require a significant investment, which may not come from the 6%, despite this 6% is a welcome move, of course. But we need much more than that funding, or much more than that investment, and predominantly that has to come from private sources. So there has to be a framework which encourages private funding into research and innovation. So with that, I think I would wait for a few more questions.
Thanks, Ram. And I think, that problem solvers, right? And that really is a culture that as a nation, we need to be, far better than what it is. Of course, we know a lot about being jugaad, doing the jugaad and being jugaadu, but that promoting that culture of innovation and problem solving using technology, or using really hands-on projects right from school, inculcating that practice and habit in all our, in everyday life, amongst all the teachers, students, community, And of course, the other point that you touched upon, that none of us may have a great answer or a, sort of an answer there really in terms of the investment, right? And everything, honestly, and I'm talking to this maybe to the network of CSR partners and industry, that everything cannot be funded by CSR. There has to be a lot more industry and government participation and investment for creating a lot more of this as an ecosystem for us. So with that, I think, summing up this particular panel, and I'd really look forward to some of these remarks, closing remarks, and from where he sees it, Dr. Mishra from the Department of Science and Technology. So Yamini, if you would like to introduce him, and then I have one or two questions which will be interesting for us all to hear from Dr. Mishra. Yamini?
For our final event of the day, we will now commence our closing keynote by a speaker who has multifarious knowledge of education, technology, and policy management. I would like to introduce Dr. Sanjay Mishra, advisor and scientist at the Department of Science and Technology for the Government of India. With a background of biomechanical engineering, Dr. Mishra has had an illustrious career in research and academia with known names such as the Cleveland Foundation, Queensland University of Technology, and Shiv Nada University, before joining the Department of Science and Technology. Here, he specializes in grant management and science and technology policy planning. Dr. Mishra, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Welcome, Dr. Mishra. And I think, with that kind of introduction, I think many people may or may not be aware that you have a great mission that you are driving across the country, focusing a lot on STEM and girl, children. And women, empowerment there. So let's talk about, I think we've kind of touched upon all these, but, really large focus for you, and what does NEP mean to you? And, then we kind of open it up to our audience. Really looking forward to your remarks, Dr. Mishra.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon to all the panelists and listeners, because I can see there are a lot of audience who are putting the questions. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of Department of Science and Technology, I again put my thanks for inviting and giving this opportunity to air my views. However, there's a disclaimer that Department of Science and Technology is not directly involved into the education policy. Where we are talking about NEP, we have given some inputs to the Ministry of Education, erstwhile the MHRD, but it was just like you and me. It was the prerogative of the MHRD then and Ministry of Education to accept and not accept. So in some sense, I'm also a citizen or outsider to the policy. And that gives me a space and room to look at more objectively. Okay, thanks. It was very interesting to listen some of the comments and observations from the panelists, and very rightly pointed out. And it's a 360 degree. I'm very happy for that. I don't know where to start because there are so many things, but I think I'll try to focus only on because this discussion is focused towards online learning, technology-enabled learning, and like tech ed, you can say, like technology and education. If I can make the overlapping between the education sector and technology, that is where the focus lies. Otherwise, we can have hours and hours of the meetings on different aspects. So, as my friend Ram pointed out, and previously also, I think we have got the other speakers also, Guru Murthy ji, Piyush. We all pointed out the one thing I think which all the panelists, including me, we all agree that this is a fantastic document, fantastic policy, fantastic vision, and also in some sense the architecture, if I can say, because it gives some broad constructs, broad frameworks, and also the aspiration of the students, aspiration of the universities. So everything combined into one pot, fusion box. I can see the vision, the policy document. Fantastic, no doubt about that. And as many of you have already pointed out, so let me again to hit that one, the million-dollar question is about the implementation part. Why this is more important? For example, some of the things, if you read the policy document of 1986, then which was modified in 1992. And when I look back, not only the policy document of 86, because I was doing my undergrad in mechanical engineering in those days, without reading, if I can remember my classroom thing, if some of the panelists will remember, especially if they are coming from the engineering and management education, you will find in 80s also, we have those seminars that how do I bring industry institute interaction? How do I put industry ready engineering graduates? Those were the talks in 90s, 80s also, and those are still there. Okay? So the point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, nevertheless, the present policy document talks much details, much in depth, and much more aspirational than the previous one. That's fine. But again, it comes on to the implementation. And as many of you pointed out, I think Ram also pointed about the bandwidth of the government. And rather than using the diplomatic word bandwidth, I'll say the funding or the finance. Okay. So those are the constraints where we all are working. And as one of these solutions has pointed out that we all stakeholders, that means the government is just one pillar of this whole system, not the pillar, I will say a pillar. Okay, citizens, parents, private sector, industry, philanthropies, endowment trusts, CSR funds, everyone has a role to play. That is fine. But when I look 1986 and 1992 and 2020, the things have changed. One, the number of stakeholders' interest and their bandwidth, I mean, non-government, like actors' bandwidth, if I can say, has increased a lot than 20 years back, 15 years back. Two, the regulatory environment, which used to be much more, I don't know what should I word the use, much more, not the robust, but much more hard in some sense. And also, the regulatory environment for private sector industries to put their money for the corporate social responsibility, there wasn't any mechanism, like 2 decades back, there wasn't anything, okay? So if you look back, present and the past, many things have changed, not only within the government, but government has become much more enabler, if I can say, so that the other actors, other players then can come on this stage and play the role. This is my, broad understanding. Not only the players from India, but players from outside India, they're also welcome. You can see the document. Not only the government system, but also the private endowment trust and players from outside, the global bodies, everybody is welcome to make this mission successful in next, I'll say, 5 to 10 years time. I'm not looking this policy document to come on the field in a year or two, because the way the aspirations are, it will take, at least several years to implement on the ground. Now, a couple of other points, which I wish to just put to the audience and to you. Before joining Department of Science and Technology, as I was in academia. About 22 years I was teaching in India and abroad, in various capacities. Now, as a teacher in a university or an IIT, you look one color of the rainbow. You look, if you stay in Bangalore, you look again 2 colors in the city. Okay, but I mean, when you think from the government of India's perspective, then just to give you an idea about, I look as 800 universities in India, 800. I don't look only 4 or 5 IITs or 1 ISC Bangalore or 3 ISERs. 800 universities, maybe 50 you will find that they are worth mentioning about the research quality, the IT infrastructure. Maybe 200 may not have that up to the mark IT infrastructure. So when we talk about one aspiration, one action point, I have to fulfill, I mean, when I say I mean not the DST, but as the government of India, to 800 universities across the length and width of the country. You can imagine 200 to 300 universities. If you look at the NIRF ranking, about the top 100, the research quality output, even in the top 100, after 50, if you take my personal view, I'm not happy with the research output of even the top 100 NIF ranked universities. The bottom 50, in my mind, need to move much ahead. Second, look at the schools. I'm managing a program, Inspire Manak program of the department, where I deal with about 2.5 lakh schools in India from class 6 to class 10th or 11th. And my program is designed in such a way that I cannot, talk to those, 4 lakh student. So I've got a portal where every school principal has been given a username password. But if you take my experience, which I think Gurumurthy ji very rightly pointed out, if you combine both, I still get hundreds of email from the remote areas, government schools, private schools, that because of the lack of the connectivity, poor bandwidth, or lack of the IT infrastructure, they are unable to log into the system. And sometimes they have to use their mobile to walk for 2-3 miles in Northeast or some areas to have a proper bandwidth connection to at least put the names of students who are participating. Same as Gurumurthy ji pointed out that only 10% students, even in Karnataka, like Bangalore, they are able to study what you call seamlessly the online lecturing courses. So again, the point I'm trying to make, I believe if I focus into this IT or online education, e-learning into this vertical, there are 2 important ingredients which needs to be strengthened. One, find this IT infrastructure, which is a hardware, or hardware and software, which money can buy. Okay, just given imaginary condition, if government of India, puts, let's say, 100 million, or maybe 500 crores, maybe in a year or 2 you can make all internet and all those things, X amount of money. But there is something else. Money alone will not be able to change the attitude and the understanding and the training of the school teachers, or even to a certain extent the college teachers, university teachers, because they were born and brought up in a certain cultural way, the way teaching paradigm was done in 80s, 90s, and many of them, even in my generation, I will say, who are like around 50, they struggle hard in universities, state universities, to have a online Blackboard. I say Blackboard, not this Blackboard, the Blackboard software, or any learning management system, LMS. They are not aware and they are not using it. It will be very difficult for them to use now. Again, how do you manage that one? So that's the second part. Money cannot bring. Money will bring certain things, tangible, but this human resource. So what I'm trying to say here is that the policy document is fine. It's like you have got a beautiful design drawing of a house made by a wonderful architect. That is fine. That plan is very nice. The elevation is very good. The color, the bathroom, the kitchen, all your requirements appears to be fulfilled in the drawing design. The more important part is the erection of the building. Same is to transfer them into the field. And that is where I'm trying to say that IT is important ingredient, is enabler. It's a multiplier, but the human resource which is associated, which will use this IT, that is where the real challenge lies. And I believe if I have some, some programs I'm running, I'm just started one program under Manak, ideally to help school teachers to learn about innovation. Because they teach about, Hindi, Sanskrit, mathematics, physics, chemistry, but innovation is a very, very alien word to again I say, a Mufassil town, Tehsil, village level school. So I'm trying to do from DST, but I believe the other organs of the government of India, or the state government for that matter, they need to go, because the country has got so many schools, so many teachers. So that is my, what we call my first reaction towards this broad spectrum. I'm talking about only one vertical, this IT education into the school and higher education. So then quickly I've got, I think because of I won't take much time. I will have just like we have got rapid fire questions. So they are just bullet points. So some of you may be interested in some things. So I've made some notes from what Joyita has sent the mails. Yes, first, if you look at the policy, it gives a 4-year undergraduate degree. Okay, so that means traditionally, if you forget engineering and few courses professional, The usual degree courses used to be 3 years. Now you have got 4-year degree courses. That means you have got 1 year extra time. Now I take it that way, that gives a more scope in terms of time and space to develop the curriculum where you can integrate not only the technology part, vocational part, but also the lateral thinking, for example, or the what I call the depth of knowledge is one way and width of the knowledge is second way, where I look the education. So earlier, most of our courses, I myself is a product of the same vertical depth of knowledge. All my mechanical engineering degree was focused mechanical engineering, little scope for literature, music, constitution, little scope because it's 4-year program. But now I see with new system, even BA with history, we'll have choice to have other subjects. And when I say other subjects, again, because I'm focusing into the technology part. So even a BA history can learn Python if he or she has got class 10th mathematics level. So these will be some new opportunities coming out for IT, and also vocational education also can be integrated in some part. Now the tech integration, the blended learning is the future. I mean, of course, Corona has got the lot of the, difficulties in our life. But if I look on the other side, I can see myself in my department, in various government departments. Earlier, there was a lack of interest in using the IT tools or having an online meeting. I remember 2 years back when I asked in DST to have a, Skype-based review of the projects. Not only my staff, but even my expert committee were reluctant to use. Some of the expert committee members, they said, no, it's not possible. They've got 100 reasons not to have. So now everybody has come up. Same way, the blended learning, which I have seen, and many of you have seen in the universities across the Europe and America in last decade, has already started. Now I think India will start in a big way because people have experienced that, yes, it is possible. Then another point, if you look at from the educational point of view, educational philosophy, you can say, earlier, whether it is school education or college education in India, all the learning of student was done synchronous learning. Now we will have asynchronous learning. Because of the time and space, a student can, use YouTube, can use e-learning content as his or her desire at the time and space. So that will increase, give flexibility. So this is another change which I can see with this new system. Then yes, now once you start asynchronous learning, that means student knows that whether he or she attends 10 to 11 1-hour lecture class, but the classroom lecture is available on the website or on the college university, then he may do a part-time job, and can learn in the evening. So that may increase the something which I've never seen in India, which I have seen outside India, that part-time students, full-time job, full-time student, part-time job, like a student population, at least in Australia and US, in undergraduate 3rd year and 4th year, I will say 90% have part-time jobs. You will not find that a student says, I'm only student doing Bachelor of Engineering or Bachelor of Science. He or she will always be doing, it could be part-time job. So those things will increase in the current education thing. Digital library, e-content, tremendous scope. Earlier also, again, I must say that there are, in India, we have got we coexist with contrast. For example, if I remember the IIT Kanpur library a few years back, maybe 15, 20 or maybe few universities in America. Otherwise, IIT Kanpur library, IIC Bangalore library, even with the e-content, they were at par with any world-class university. There's no problem. But again, if you go at the other side of this story, there will be hundreds of the engineering colleges or degree colleges in India where you will not find any digital content in any library. So you have got the whole broad spectrum. So this e-content, digital content, I believe not only the government of India, but various agencies, as Niti Aayog was pointing out, Niti Aayog has been a very good integrator. If I do not mince my words, that even the government of India or any government, not only state governments, the way they are compartmentalized. Niti Aayog is a very good glue which connects two departments, bring the social good outside. So Niti Aayog has been doing wonderful job with connecting state governments with Ministry of Education and DST and various Ministry of Industry, getting things, making common platform and giving to the public one. So those things, I believe this integrator or what the industry says, aggregator, these things will come up in future in education sector. And that is again where the technology will play a very important role, I can foresee, because this is a technological thing. Please remember one point which I would like to make it clear, I think, because I've been teaching also in the past life. So it is not the technology which impresses student. It is a necessary thing, but not the end. It is the content, it is the pedagogy, it is the interesting subject matter which ultimately wins and learned by student. So you may have the excellent technology with excellent bandwidth, ICT, best computers, best audio systems, but if the content is boring, if the mathematics is not taught in a proper way, the student will give it's a waste of time. So again, we have to remember that technology can do certain things to certain level, but cannot replace and cannot substitute the pedagogy or the creative element in the teaching and learning paradigm. So that has to be emphasized. That should not be underestimated in any way, despite all these technologies, even though if you make them available. Next good point is, I think, yes, integration of technology. I've already told that this aggregator, like learning management systems, may be done by one college. For example, if you take Delhi University, may have, let's say 30 or 40 colleges. Earlier, you have got different teachers for different streams at different colleges. The space and time was limited. But now with the advent of technology, you can always have, universities can have one big lecture with best ICT, and then you can have tutorials at the different colleges. That is what the Cambridge Oxford has been doing in the past, that universities will have a one lengthy, hall where you have got 200 and 250 students, and then you have got a tutorial class size where the student interacts with the teacher, asks the question with a size of 10 to 15. So with this technology thing, I think that there's a big scope, and this is the way things will go, because the government is also putting on the GER. You need the enrollment ratio, or there is the aspiration of the every section of society to study at the school level, not only school level, but also the college level. So where the space, the brick and mortar universities will not have enough classroom space sizes. And that is where this e-learning, e-content has to come up to supplement the demand and supply balance. Then I'm very happy again as a government that there are 4 important bold points which you have already noticed, and that has been taken care. First is the integration of the technology into education in a very explicit way. Earlier also we have like the Ministry of Education has a technology enabled learning division. So there was whole lot of things were going on, but now as the policy document, this gives a lot of impetus and force to move ahead. Multidisciplinary learning, you have already discussed. This is fantastic. But again, with multidisciplinary learning, again, I will have a pinch of salt on that, because if you just look back 10 years back, 15 years back, every university in India used to have electives and open electives. About 10 years back, the UGC has mandated a concept called choice-based learning, CBS. They have given, but the point is they were given on the papers. Some universities, because of the resources, they were able to give choice-based learning, that if you are doing a like a course in science, physics, you can have a sociology also. So what I'm trying to say that there were things which were earlier available, okay, not explicitly or loudly mentioned as a policy document, but the lack of the either a will, I will say will first, second resources, and third again supply and demand. Because the student thought, if I study with physics, chemistry, math, that's a good combination. How am I going to have a music, whether this is going to pay me or not? Those things were there. So again, couple of things were there in the past, but not used practically. Tools were already there. Then there is a explicit mention in the 4th industrial revolution leading to new skills and jobs. This is where we're talking about the AI and machine learning and the robotics and these kind of things. But these are the 4, I will say, thematic areas which the policy documents has clearly mentioned. But there is one underlying philosophy. I mean, there are many philosophies, but one philosophy which is relevant to present panel is the critical thinking. To develop the critical thinking among students and out-of-box thinking, problem solving, And when I say critical thinking, I think many of you are from education system or education background. There is something called Bloom's taxonomy, where the learning can be categorized as a ladder. Like step 1 is called, I mean, sometimes you call rote learning, but they call it as a learning by remembering something. So something can be recalled is a learning level 1 level. Then you have after the recall, then you level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, like this you have got. Then you have got the expression. Then I think it comes to the analysis, synthesis, and final comes to evaluation. So as these are the higher order of learning. Now earlier, if we were expected to teach in a higher order learning, because if you have a basic level 1 and 2, student can recall, express, can repeat things, but whether he or she has absorbed and is able to apply the knowledge into real world situation, that was not tested. But now I believe with these there will be more emphasis. If you look at the question papers, for example, I consider the greatest, the force for learning, whether we like or we don't like, is the examination. Look at the examination. Still, you will see that many of the universities or even engineering colleges, the question will start: define X, Y, Z, list A, B, C. That means you are simply asking a verbatim answer of something, a content which is lying there. You will hardly find before 4th year or 3rd year where somebody students ask that, well, there is a village with population of XYZ, the electrical demand is this much, can you design something? There is no one answer for that. We always shy away to have this open-ended real world problem. That is where the crux lies, and that is where I believe the policy document talks, and I believe the teaching community and this education system will take. That is where the industry likes. That is where we lack. Okay, like previously, the government of India, the policy documents talks and does also, not only talks, but has a explicit plan about the access, equity, and inclusion. I'll not give in detail, although that is my main job in DST, to empower women into science. So the only one line that not only a philosophy or a talking point in this policy document, I'm very happy for that. They have categorized and they have specified a fund for helping not only for women and for the deprived section, geographical deprivation, it could be social one, it could be the women, it could be gender based. So all these deprived sections, because of the number of reasons, they are unable to cope up into the mainstream. Now there is a special fund. The problem, when I was talking to a principal of a college and vice chancellor, they said, till now, our thinking was to provide scholarships. Now scholarships come with a particular cash that they can be given to meritorious students, they can be given to XYZ, and as a scholarship only. Now a vice chancellor from the women university, she was happy. She said, now if I get money at my discretion, I will ask my girl student. Some of them leave because they don't have a bicycle. Some of them leave because they don't have a particular fees to pay on the particular time. So the point I'm trying to make that this inclusion one has been dealt one step ahead, not only in terms of the philosophy, but also in terms of the clear-cut pathway to provide funding. Of course, challenges many of you have mentioned. I'm also on that one. The challenges are there, but I'm very happy that there are more partners to the government to solve these challenges. And we have already discussed, it's from the private sector, industry. Now I'll come to the 4 points which the organizers of this meeting have asked. The first one you have asked about that quick point, how the schools are going to manage the core system, core subjects versus vocational. Now, my personal understanding is some of the schools will do good job, no doubt, and many of the government schools will try to do, because the vocational component requires a infrastructure which as of now we do not have. Not only the government, but this is the area where I believe the CSR funds or from industry participation with the government will help a lot in vocational part, in strengthening the vocational part. There is a second part. We live in a country where historically, socially, whatever you call it, the vocational education where a student or even a citizen does a handy job was not considered to be something where the parents desire. That's the way most of us are born and brought up. Everybody likes to have a white collar job with this. So that's one thing, but mindset is changing slowly. So vocational component is really good, but the challenges in these things. Again, please remember that vocational education after class 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th was already part in 1992. So last 20 and 10, 30 years back also the policy was there. So second part, the question lies, what can be the digital learning platforms do in this? Yes, digital learning platforms, I believe this is where a lot of emphasis will come in coming years, coming days. A, because of Corona crisis, people were forced to come up. B, because of the expansion of education, and also the quality of ICT has increased a lot in India in last 10 years. Like remember from the dial-up connection I used to use, 10 years, 15 years back. Now you have got pretty seamless connections in at least few cities, few places, few spots in the country, which I believe in coming years will improve. So digital learning is the future. But again, I am personal opinion that will not replace the conventional learning, conventional system, which will go in partnership, and the blended learning, digital with the face-to-face, what we call the Socrates learning, both will go together. Both will complement each other. They will not supplement, they will complement each other. Third question I can see is the practical-based e-learning versus the physical sciences learning. Here I've got a word of caution that no matter how good the fantastic e-learning practical thing comes, one cannot replace the physical learning. For example, you have a chemistry lab where you have a titration done, or you have a frog dissection done on a biology lab, a pendulum going into the physics lab. Physical things will have a different cognitive impact and effect. So again, here also, my personal understanding is they will complement each other. But I believe these physical science labs they will be required. But one can always do, for example, that before you start a physical science lab, you can always do the same practical in a virtual lab. I mean, one of my colleagues in Australia used to do, like in many of in civil engineering lab, a surveying lab where you survey a road or a post office or a building. But before going to the lab, a day before, the students were done a virtual survey lab. And so that they were in the field, they were able to do the much more smarter thing, much more detailed and deeper understanding than otherwise. So the third question which has come is the multidisciplinary colleges education means for India. Multidisciplinary colleges in education. Now here I would like to give one data. I don't remember exact number, but it's, if you look at the Government of India's survey of higher education, I think some 70% colleges, within the quotes, colleges in India are single discipline. If I can guess, it's a BA degree course. So what I'm trying to say, when you think about a college, a generic college in India, already we are talking about, like out of 4 colleges, 3 colleges are standalone, one single degree Bachelor of Arts, full stop. We do not have not only the multidisciplinary, but even within social sciences, we do not have the economics and commerce, everything. So that is one of the biggest challenges, because most of the higher education, if you look at, they were more into the enrollment thing because of the social factors. People studying as higher education because that is a desirable thing socially. Not that every student was willing to do the higher education. They'll be more happy in vocational or otherwise. So multidisciplinary colleges will come. It will take time to change the capacity, the understanding of the multidisciplinary colleges education in India. Nevertheless, in last 5 years, I'm very happy that, as Ram has also pointed out, that if you look at the global scenario, most of the top universities or institutions, they are multidisciplinary. MIT, although the name is IT's technology, but they have got the best Nobel laureates in economics. And the 2 subjects which are taught to the mechanical engineering student in MIT is the constitution and music. So, I mean, so this was a practice globally. Things are starting. For example, IIT Kharagpur, if you take example, who will think that 10 years back, 15 years back, that IIT will start a medical school or IIT will start a law school? Now IIT Kharagpur has already started. So trying to say that, yes, the ice is now melting, things are moving today is one IIT Kharagpur, tomorrow you'll have 4 IITs, maybe, next 5 years, we will have. So our direction is clear, our speed may be slow, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but as long as our objectives and the destination is in right direction, we will achieve it. So with this is general my comment. Finally, I think it's this is all from my side. Piyush has rightly pointed out the value which Niti Aayog can do, and of course for everything, I mean, at the end of the day, one can always blame government for things which are not working in the system. But on the other side, as someone has pointed out very correctly, that this is the right time where all the stakeholders have to come up, put the shoulders, take the load, and work together. Last point, of course, that is not relevant to this particular education thing, but it's close to my heart. I think my friend Ram has pointed out very rightly, which I also try to, tell the outside. If you look at the table of in R&D, make a table, the government contribution versus the private or industry contribution. Take country, China, South Korea, Japan, 80% private, 20% government. US is, I think, 73, UK 79, something like 70 to 80%. The exception is Israel, if I remember. Israel, the government puts a lot because of the size and other thing. And there's one more country which has got, I think, close to 50%. Now, India, the number is completely reversed. It is 70% government, 30% industry. And I think in last, because this is something data I was looking, in 1990, I mean, almost 30 years back, 25 years back, the data was 25 was the private sector, 75 was government. In almost 25 years, the private sector has come from 25 to 37, 38. And the government has share has slightly reduced. I think it's 45 versus 55, close to that. But again, it took 25 years. And you rightly pointed out that now, as far the innovation is concerned, unless I believe none of the government with the best efforts, with the best one, can make this innovation circle complete unless this private sector, unless the industry comes into picture. And when I say industry comes, unless the hard money comes into picture, because if you don't put money, you don't care for that. So I'm very hopeful for that in future, in next decade, not only in education, but also in the research and development, this private sector money. And just I would like to clarify one point, what Ram was pointed out is CSR fund. I think the industry has 2 legs. One is the CSR fund, that is mandatory by law, that comes with education. But for R&D, I think before last year, the act has been amended. Now the industry can put not only for the education thing, but also the CSIR labs to IITs, they can put their R&D money, which will be exempted from the, which will be counted in CSR fund. Now, so that means the industry has to put the money for the R&D thing to make happen into that sector, into the research work. And this also, if you look at the, this is like I'm looking from the bottom, unless at the top level, the industry and academia comes together, like talks, when I was doing my BTech in 80s, the challenges of becoming industry institute interaction, they are challenged today and they will remain in tomorrow also, unless they come together and they partner in terms of the funding together and developing the knowledge IP, developing the products together.
Yeah,
so
absolutely right, Dr. Mishra. And I'm afraid we really, I mean, much you bring that kind of experience and passion. And I wish, we get to work with you very, very closely so that, so many questions, so many observations from so many people, I really would like to sort of spend a bit of time there. But thank you for, really energizing. I mean, amazing for putting all those remarks out there and so many aspects that, that makes us. And so when I was listening to you, you were giving the, example or analogy of a house. I was actually thinking that, India is quite prepared with a massive international level stadium. It is just for us to open up the doors so that all the players kind of really make it a great success. So a couple of questions. I'm afraid we won't have time. I'll just have to take about maybe 3 questions. And, quite a few saying that, couple of common threads there. especially the underserved community, how do we do this more from learning part, also from the infrastructure part. There's also observations and questions on how higher education is actually partnering with the school system, to which I would really say that you are a great example that DST is driving with some of the programs with Manak, you said, Vigyan Jyoti, all those Inspire programs that you've sort of designed, kind of tackles all that. Let's see what else. How is this coding or STEM education will reach out to the interior part of the country where there is no proper electricity? Well, we talked a lot about infrastructure. Infrastructure issues were there 20 years back, and it will continue. So I think lots that we have progressed, we have to really make this, and as somebody said, that we may have to look at some of the states as examples, some of the partners who have come up to help, and of course the government. Lots of questions from the NGO partners, of course, indeed, very tough times. But, partnering with, industry partners who have specific focus or strategies around education or skilling may be a good idea. Remote areas always have been an issue, right? And will continue probably, but I think lots of progress there as well. So we need to probably look at partnering with both government and not-for-profit partners there along with industries. NEP starts with an emphasis on the multidisciplinary aspect. Of course, that has been touched about quite in detail. There were one question, I think, specifically for Ram that I'd like to go back to from the audience. Ram, and it was more for, really, before I go there to you, Ram, there was also something which is great, talking about radio, television as a part of ICT for e-learning. How can we bring them into the mix? I mean, there's already one channel for each subject that, the country is thinking about. NCERT has that. DST already has something called Engage with Science. We should really look at community internet radios and, all kinds of sort of channels of communication there for dissemination of learning. Today I saw, also a great post from one of the senior, government officers, that there's a whole lot of learning that's happening even outside, like Dr. Shah said, it's all there, whether it's the Gurukul system or whatever. Learning kind of is really happening all the time. And going back to this specifically, for Ram, how to make a strong case to leverage industry participation in vocational training. What would it be to get a buy-in to promote industry partnerships? So Ram, that's probably for you. How can we kind of leverage that very, very strongly?
I think if you look at the trend all over the world, the industry players or the corporations that are growing, they are the ones who are growing on the basis of the technology and the research investments that they have, be it Tesla or be it Amazon or be it Facebook, Google, I mean, whatever giants that come in our name. And even, for example, back home, Reliance, for example, which has recently seen a huge growth, which also has seen the growth because of their investment in technology. So conventional ways of doing business may not bring growth to industry. And therefore, this makes a very strong case for industry to start investing in not just vocational training and education, but also in the research and innovation, which percolates down towards various aspects of training the next generation of people also. I mean, so essentially, my take on that would be that it makes a very strong case for, because business is for profit, and unless there is a profit element involved and business actually see a value in spending on that thing, why would they spend? So So I think the strong case is that it actually generates revenues for them. If they are investing in technology, if they are investing in research, if they are investing in people, it essentially bring growth to them, which otherwise would not come to them. Or in fact, otherwise in the lack of it, they might get obsolete also, like many other industries have gone obsolete from being one of the top players in their respective sectors. They kind of very quickly went out of the market because they were not adopting the right technology or they were not innovating. So I think it makes a very strong case for industry.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of comes to this whole thing that cooperation, collaboration, co-creating are something that we really have to make, all of us come forward and make this as a unique model more than ever now, so that we can really implement and see ourselves in a much happier place, whether we are seeing it from a government standpoint, from an education or educationist, educator, student. It takes a lot. It takes a village, like they say, to bring up one child. Here we are talking about the future of the country. So, with that, I think, thank you very much, all of you. Dr. Mishra for those amazing points and energy, Dr. Shaha for those opening remarks, all my dear colleagues and peers, panelists, thank you very much. And thank you, CSR Box. Over to you, Yamini. Is there anything else that we have missed? Otherwise, we all say bye to each other from here. Yamini?
Thank you, Joyita, for wonderfully moderating this panel. I would just once again like to thank all our panelists for being here today and sharing your insights, models, and thoughts and experiences, on the NEP. And I think, the climb ahead is tough and is difficult, but it is the collaboration, synergy, and innovation which are going to be driving that and really helping this policy come alive. Once again, thank you to our participants for being here today, and we hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you.